I never imagined that a quiet red barn at the edge of our little rural subdivision would turn into the center of the biggest fight of my retirement. At 68 years old, after decades of working double shifts, raising kids, and paying off a mortgage, I thought I had earned a peaceful life. The barn wasn't fancy. It was solid, well-kept, and older than most of the houses around it. To me, it represented freedom, fresh air, and a place to tinker, store tools, and occasionally host my grandkids when they wanted to learn how to fix something with their hands. But to one HOA board member everyone whispered about, the barn was apparently a menace to society. It started with a letter taped to my mailbox, bright orange paper so no one could miss it. The words "unsafe structure" were stamped across the top like a scarlet letter. According to the HOA, my barn posed a potential danger to the neighborhood and needed to be demolished or brought into compliance immediately. No inspection notice, no warning, no conversation, just a demand. I remember standing there in the driveway, letter shaking in my hand, wondering how something that had stood firm through storms, snow, and time could suddenly be declared unsafe by a woman who had never set foot inside it. I called the HOA office that afternoon, gone but firm. That's when I met Karen, at least over the phone. Her voice was sharp, clipped, and full of authority she seemed to enjoy wielding. She told me complaints had been filed. When I asked who filed them and what exactly was unsafe, she brushed it off. "We don't need to provide details," she said. "The board has spoken." I hung up feeling something I hadn't felt in years. That old knot in my stomach that comes when you know someone is pushing you just to see if you'll bend. Over the next week, the situation escalated quickly. Another letter arrived, this one threatening fines that would accumulate daily. Neighbors I'd known for years suddenly avoided eye contact. One kind couple quietly told me Karen had been going door to door, warning people that my barn was a hazard, that it could collapse, that it lowered property values. I couldn't believe it. The barn had been inspected when I bought the property. I had reinforced it myself over the years. This wasn't about safety, it was about control. I decided I wasn't going to roll over. I requested a formal inspection report. The HOA sent back a vague checklist with boxes ticked but no explanations. That's when I noticed something interesting. The form referenced state safety codes but had no official seal, no inspector's name, nothing verifiable. It looked homemade. That's when I knew I needed to step outside the HOA's little bubble and bring in someone who actually mattered. I contacted the state building inspector's office myself. The woman on the phone was polite, professional, and a breath of fresh air compared to Karen's tone. She scheduled an inspection for the following week. When I notified the HOA, Karen showed up at my property the very next day, unannounced, clipboard in hand. She stood at the fence, arms crossed, and told me I was making things worse for myself. I looked her straight in the eye and told her I just wanted the truth. She smirked and said, "We'll see." The day of the inspection arrived, and so did Karen, hovering like a storm cloud. The state inspector was a middle-aged man with a calm demeanor and a no-nonsense attitude. He shook my hand, listened carefully as I explained the history of the barn, and then went to work. He checked the foundation, the beams, the roof supports, and the electrical setup. He climbed ladders, took photos, and made notes. Karen followed him around, pointing at random boards and making exaggerated faces, as if hoping something would magically fall apart. After nearly 2 hours, the inspector came back down, wiped his hands, and smiled. "This barn is solid," he said. "It meets state safety standards. In fact, it's better maintained than many newer structures I see." Karen's face went pale. She tried to argue, saying the HOA had its own rules. The inspector calmly explained that while HOAs could have guidelines, they couldn't override state safety determinations or fabricate violations. He handed me the official report, stamped and signed. I thought that would be the end of it, but I underestimated Karen's persistence. The HOA still tried to fine me, claiming I hadn't followed their internal process. That's when I sent copies of the state report to every board member, along with a polite but firm letter stating that any further action would be considered harassment. I also spoke to a local attorney, who confirmed that the HOA was on very thin ice. Word spread quickly through the neighborhood. People who had been silent started stopping by again. One neighbor admitted Karen had pressured him to complain. Another apologized for believing the rumors. At the next HOA meeting, which I attended for the first time in years, the atmosphere was tense. Karen sat stiffly at the front, while the board reviewed the state inspector's findings. One by one, they acknowledged that the barn was compliant and that the HOA had overstepped. Karen didn't apologize. She never does. But she lost her position as head of the safety committee that night. The fines were dropped, and a formal notice was issued stating my barn was approved and safe. As I walked out of that meeting, several neighbors shook my hand. One older gentleman leaned in and whispered, "Thanks for standing up." Someone needed to. Standing in my barn the next morning, sunlight streaming through the windows, I felt a quiet sense of victory. Not the loud chest-thumping kind, but the deep satisfaction that comes from knowing you didn't let someone bully you into giving up something you worked for. At our age, we've seen enough to know that peace isn't free. Sometimes you have to protect it. If this story resonates with you, take a moment to like and subscribe to the channel so you don't miss more real-life stories like this. And I'd love to know where you're watching from today. Drop it in the comments and share if you've ever dealt with an HOA or someone who tried to push you around, because you're definitely not alone.